Every January in Las Vegas, the International Consumer Electronics Show, better known as CES, draws manufacturers from across the tech world to show off the latest and greatest products and to give the rest of us a hint as to where technology is headed this year and into the future. And on display at CES this year are things that we've all probably heard about that are already in production just around the corner for consumers like us to buy, like 3D printers and smartwatches. There was also tech that's just plain strange, like this dog collar for $299 that can track your pet's heart rate so that you can monitor Fido's health. Because who doesn't need one of those, right? And then there's always a few things revealed at CES that are truly game-changing. Things that will one day change how our world functions. And in my opinion, the biggest game changer at CES this year was several car manufacturers showing off the progress that they have made when it comes to driverless cars. You see, driverless cars have been around for a while now. The technology has, at least. But the progress has really been picking up as of late. So much so that there are some experts who predict all of us could be using driverless cars within the next 7 to 10 years. And recently, when I was back in Ohio visiting my family, this rapid progress of driverless car technology became a central theme in the conversations that were taking place between me and my parents. So let's just take a quick poll this evening as we get started. This will be kind of fun. Show of hands, how many of you are the kind of person who would never, ever let a computer drive your car? Okay. You folks are my mom. And you're what's known as a control freak, okay? Now, how many of you are more like, oh yeah, even if this thing is a prototype and the computer running it is named Hal, I am in there. Like, I want to be in that car. How many of you are more like that? All right, see, you all are me and my dad, and you're what's known as awesome, right? You see, I love the idea of a driverless car. I love this idea. I mean, just think about this. Instead of having to drive on your commute, you could read a book. You could watch a movie. You could sleep. I mean, road trips will never be the same. They will be amazing. But not surprisingly, there are some people, like my mother, who will simply never, ever let go of the wheel. What happens if the computer fails and the car crashes, Adam? Then you die, Mom. I mean, that's life. Stuff happens, right? You see, for some, letting go of control of the wheel is just too much. They can't bring themselves to do it. They are afraid that the world is going to turn into like a real-life Terminator movie, and the computers are going to take over. And you see, unlike me, those people, like my mom, are control freaks. But what if the computers did take over? I mean, what if you got into your driverless car one day, and it puts you on the highway, and all of a sudden you're going 220 miles an hour, and you can't make it slow down? What if you told your car that you wanted to go to Iowa, but it started taking you to North Dakota instead? You know, you're sitting in there, you pull up Google Maps on your phone, and the screen just says, ha 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 ha, right? I mean, what if you're on a road trip and you're like, hey, driverless car, I need to go to the bathroom. And it's like, the next rest area is 140 miles away, you can hold it, right? I mean, you see, it doesn't take very long to realize that whether you're more like me and would be willing to give up control of the wheel to a computer, or you're more like my mom and you would never, ever give up control of the wheel, all of us have limits. All of us have limits to how much control we're willing to give up. In other words, at some level, all of us are control freaks. All of us desire to have control in our lives. And that desire for control in our lives often leads us to think and believe that we are in control of our lives, even when it comes to areas of life where we have little or no control whatsoever. Now, you might be thinking to yourself right now, wait a second, Adam, that's a bit of a leap. All right, it may be true that I desire some level of control in my life. All of us have that. But that doesn't mean that I think I'm in control. In fact, I know that there's some things in life I can't control, and I'm aware of those, and I have a healthy sense of what I can and can't control. Now, I say that you might be thinking that right now because that's exactly what I thought until I was kind of pulled out of my own self-confidence in this area by the sound of my dog barking at me yesterday. Because he couldn't understand why I was jumping up and down in front of my television screaming, shoot it! Shoot the ball! As I watched the University of Colorado play basketball on television, right? You see, my own healthy, balanced sense of control apparently led me to think that from the comfort of my own living room, almost 1,000 miles away, I could somehow magically and telepathically control the mind of our point guard and make him look at the shot clock as it was winding down, right? We all do this. We all have this sense that we're in control. And this illusion of control, this belief that we are in control of something in life, even when we're not, is where superstitions of all sorts kind of have their roots, right? Whether this is you wearing your lucky socks to a hockey game or eating red meat in order to increase your chances of conceiving a boy. All of us desire control in our lives. And that desire for control leads us to believe that we are in control, even in areas of life where we're not. This is so much the case that businesses are now using our illusion of control to manipulate us in countless ways. The best example of this, in my mind, is how modern offices are changing their building practices. You see, many older offices have a single thermostat located in the basement that controls the temperature of the entire office. And not surprisingly, employees regularly complain about the temperature in their workspace, right? It's too cold or it's too hot. And of course, the reason that they built these offices with a single thermostat in the basement is so that the businesses using this space can keep their heating and cooling costs down, right? Someone sets the thermostat, it just stays that way, no one fiddles with it, and so energy costs are down. But the trade-off, of course, is that the employees complain about the temperature. So today, most modern offices are now built with a thermostat installed in the main room that the employees can use to control the temperature to their liking. And as businesses have surveyed their employees, they found that installing a thermostat in the room that the employees use, where they can control the temperature themselves, lowers employee complaints, it increases employee happiness, and it increases office productivity as well. But there's a secret. The thermostat in the room isn't actually hooked up to anything at all. Many businesses today install a fake thermostat into their office to give their employees the illusion that they are controlling the temperature. And the kicker is that in businesses that have switched from older office spaces where that thermostat's in the basement to a more modern office where the thermostat is fake but is in the main room, the employees are still happier, they complain less, their productivity increases, and the business actually runs the building cooler than before without anyone ever knowing, which means that their energy costs are even lower as well. You see, we are so easily duped because all of us desire control in our lives, and that desire for control leads us to need to feel and believe and think that we are in control, even when we're not. And there are, of course, hints all around us that clue us into the reality that we are very much not in control. We watch as our favorite sports player falls to the ground after tearing her ACL. There's no way to predict that. It just happens. We wake up to news that a tsunami has hit the islands of the Pacific, or that another mass shooting has hit our nation's schools. In this past week alone, here in the Lakeside community, I've heard from people who have lost their job unexpectedly, from people who caught the flu without warning. And of course, many of us in this room have at some point or another experienced that feeling of being completely out of control that comes when we find out about a family member's cancer diagnosis or about a sudden and unexpected death. And you see, when that happens, when we feel out of control, often we respond by trying to get it back, even if that control was never there to begin with. We react by desperately trying to grasp onto control even harder than before. We clench our fists in this desperate attempt to grab onto control that wasn't even there in the first place for us to grab onto. And when that inevitably fails for us, we almost always resort to using these clenched fists against other people, often in the form of blame. Well, that trainer should have paid closer attention to her health. That's why she tore her ACL. Or if people would just stop polluting the earth, we wouldn't even have tsunamis. Or if those liberals would let everyone carry guns into schools, those kids' lives would have been saved. Everyone does this, and we do this all the time, right? Why is our kid behaving this way? She's your mother, right? I mean, we blame our parents on stuff. Well, why is this church not doing what I want it to do? Well, it's because that leader doesn't listen to anyone. Not that I've ever heard that one. Why is it that my favorite coffee mug fell onto the floor and broke into 1,000,000 pieces? You know why? It's because Sarah put it too close to the front of the cabinet, right? Not that I've ever said that one. Brene Brown, a writer whose work that I greatly admire, has said, blame is nothing more than an attempt to discharge pain and discomfort. Friends, that quote is so money right there, we could just stop there this evening and call it a night, right? Blame is nothing more than an attempt to discharge pain and discomfort. That is gold right there, and that is so true. We desire control in our lives, which leads us to believe that we have all kinds of control that we don't actually have. And when that reality smacks us in the face, the pain and the discomfort of it all leads us to blame someone, anyone, just so that we can keep the illusion that we're in control and that we have control, even if we really don't. As another great writer of our time, Gnarls Barkley, once wrote, "Come on now, who do you think you are? Bless your soul, you really think you're in control." But we're not. And our unwillingness to confront that reality in our lives, our unwillingness to face the facts and work to gain a healthy sense of what we do and do not have control of in our lives and in our world, is hurting us as we clench our fists tighter and tighter to maintain this illusion of control. It's hurting others as we shout out blame and accusations and as we try to control the people around us. It's hurting our kids as we try to control them and shape them into what we think they should be. It's hurting our marriages and our relationships as we blame one another over situations where no one's even at fault. And it's hurting our own souls as we flail about as people who try to control everyone around us into thinking and saying what we want them to say about us. We're in this teaching series right now called Reset, where we've been looking at this ancient spiritual practice of taking a day to rest called the Sabbath, which Jewish people and followers of Jesus have observed for millennia. And Sabbath is a Hebrew word that means stop, cease, rest. It's all about, in a 7-day week, taking one day off just to rest. And as we've been talking about, the Sabbath is a God-given reset button for our lives. This reset button for our lives benefits us in countless ways. It can restore our bodies. It can heal our often wounded sense of identity. And tonight, as we continue exploring this ancient spiritual practice, we're going to be talking about how the Sabbath can reset our sense of control. But I want you to know something as we go into this. Tonight, we are starting to take a turn in this series into what I like to call the dark side of the Sabbath. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand. It's not that the Sabbath actually hurts us or harms us in any way, okay? The Sabbath is given to us by God as a reset button for our lives. It's there to heal us and restore us. It's there for our benefit. But that doesn't mean that the Sabbath is always nice. You see, yes, the Sabbath heals us, it restores us. At its most basic level, it provides us with much needed rest and relaxation. And that's nice, right? I mean, taking a day at the spa is nice. Last week, we talked about how the Sabbath can reset our sense of identity. The Sabbath is given to us by God so that we take time to remember that we are enough. We are beloved children of God, each and every one of us, no matter what anyone else says, no matter what anyone else thinks, no matter what we even think about ourselves sometimes. And that's nice, right? It's nice to be remembered that God loves us. But the Sabbath also resets our sense of control. The Sabbath is given to us by God to remind us that we're not in control. That in reality, we don't control very much at all, and that life can often be unpredictable, uncontrollable, and messy. And that doesn't sound pleasant at all, does it? I mean, taking time to intentionally step into the anxiety of feeling out of control, why would anyone do that? That sounds painful. That doesn't sound nice at all, and that's true. It's not nice, but it is necessary. Because ultimately, if we don't take the time on a regular basis to allow God to reset our sense of control, there's a good chance that we will go through our entire lives living with these clenched fists as we try to control everyone and everything around us. We will live as people who react to everything that happens in our lives with blame, discharging our pain and discomfort rather than confronting it in healthy ways. And we will do whatever it takes to maintain our illusion of control, no matter the cost to ourselves or to others. This is why the Jewish people and followers of Jesus have observed this practice for millennia, because they know that the Sabbath can reset our sense of control. It's not nice, but it is necessary. And for the Jewish people, on Sabbath, there are 39 categories of work that are prohibited. They range from planting to cooking to sewing and more. Not surprisingly, these categories were determined over time, and they developed into a historical tradition that is still observed by the Jewish people today. But the reason that these 39 specific kinds of work came to be prohibited in Judaism has its roots in the Bible. In the book of Exodus, after the Jewish people have been freed from their slavery in Egypt by God, they begin meandering their way through the desert towards a land of promise. And at first, in Exodus, the story is quite exciting. Israel's freedom from slavery involves a number of dramatic events, like seas parting and plagues coming down from the heavens. And as they wander in the wilderness, God visits with them on a mountain and delivers these laws and commandments that they're supposed to live by. It's rather exciting, actually. But then all of a sudden, at about halfway through the book, everything just comes to this screeching halt. The action-packed narrative stops, and the rest of the book of Exodus provides, in excruciating detail, these instructions about how the people of Israel are to build a big tent called the tabernacle. It is boring. It is horribly boring. But to the Jewish people especially, it's important. Because you see, it's from these instructions that the Jewish people came up with this list of 39 activities that they're not to do on the Sabbath. All of these 39 activities that you're not to do on the Sabbath come from the work that was required to build this tent called the tabernacle. In this story, God instructs the people to build the tabernacle, this place where God is going to dwell and reside with them. But in order to do this, in order to build this tent, God says that they must observe the Sabbath. In other words, God says, in order to build my dwelling place, you must also rest. And you see, as followers of Jesus began to see their task in the world of making the whole world God's dwelling place in the light of Jesus' death and resurrection, it was the same principle that applied. To build God's dwelling place, to build God's kingdom, you must also rest. That's why the earliest followers of Jesus observed Sabbath as well. And this principle of rest being necessary for building God's dwelling place, to build God's kingdom, is rooted in that oh-so-boring part of Exodus that I don't like, but we're going to deal with tonight, all right? At the very end of God's instructions about how to build the tabernacle, here's what is said. Exodus 31. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, be sure to keep the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is a sign between me and you in every generation, so you will know that I am the Lord. Do your work for 6 days, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of complete rest that is holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day will be put to death." God commands the people of Israel, keep the Sabbath. Why? So you will know that I am the Lord. In other words, you keep the Sabbath in order to remember that you're not the Lord, right? And for the Jewish people, at the very heart of this practice of Sabbath is the reminder that you and I, that we are not God, and that therefore we are not ultimately in control. Now, the Jewish people and followers of Jesus have always acknowledged, rightly in my opinion, that we do have some control as human beings. In the creation stories of ancient Israel, God tells human beings, be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and master it, take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and everything crawling on the ground. Now, this is a statement, of course, that has been misinterpreted to mean everything from we can do whatever we want with the planet to the whole point of life is to have lots of babies, and all kinds of other things that just miss the point, right? But here's the point, and it's telling us something important. The point is this. Human beings have been given some control over the world. We are to take charge in some ways. We're to shape our world. But the Sabbath is there to remind us, always and forever, that while we can and should shape the world, we didn't make the world. And ultimately, that means that we aren't in control of it. We're to take charge of it, but we aren't in charge of it. This is God's world, not ours. And the Sabbath is there to remind us of that. It's there to remind us that God alone is our creator and that God alone is in charge. At its very core, the Sabbath is all about reestablishing balance in our lives. It's about reestablishing the balance between work and rest. We aren't made just for work. We aren't made just for rest. We're made for both, and they're supposed to be kept in balance. 6 days you may work and do all your tasks, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, a day of rest, as the Ten Commandments says. And the same goes for our sense of control. The Sabbath resets our sense of control. It brings our sense of control back into balance by reminding us that while we do have some control that we can and should use 6 days of the week to shape our lives and to shape our world, we are not ultimately in control. God is. And balance is key here. Because you see, too many followers of Jesus today either assume that we have no control whatsoever, that all we can do when it comes to the injustices of our world is to kind of hole up and wait it out until God acts, while other followers of Jesus today actually begin to believe falsely and dangerously, in my opinion, that we can change the world into what it's supposed to be ourselves, without any help from God whatsoever, if only we were to try harder or do more. But you see, neither of those beliefs are true, and both are out of balance. Because while we do have some control, while we can shape the world in some ways, well, there are 6 days a week in which God has commanded each and every one of us to work for justice in our world. There is also one day where God tells us we are to stop, cease, rest. One day where we are to let go of control and simply trust God instead. Now, as soon as I say that, you're going to just have to allow me a little bit of a rabbit trail this evening. Because as soon as I say those words, let go and trust God instead, I think that many of us in this room begin to hear in our heads that now common cliche, let go and let God. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, please count yourself very blessed. Because other than making me want to vomit every time that I say it, let go and let God is this cliche that, in my opinion, isn't true and often does immense harm when it comes to what we believe about God. Let's recap. The Sabbath is given to us by God to reset our sense of control, okay? The Sabbath reminds us that we are not in control. God is. God is ultimately in control. But all too often, saying that God is ultimately in control starts to become this belief system in which God is now behind every rock and every event as the puppeteer who pulls the strings of the world. And in my opinion, that is a very faulty and harmful belief about God. It's one that stems, I think, from the desire for control that we all have in our lives. Because you see, just as we are prone to reacting with blame towards other people when we face a situation that's out of our control, we often do the same thing with God. I remember this so clearly when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer a number of years back. My mom is one of 10 kids in her family, so needless to say, there were plenty of opinions to go around when the diagnosis came in from the doctors. And I remember as my mom would tell family members one by one about her cancer diagnosis, how one after the other, the pain and discomfort of it all would get discharged in the form of blame. The conspiracy theorists in our family would say, I read an article about how our hometown water supply had high levels of chemicals in it while we were growing up. That's why you got cancer, right? The agnostic chimed in, well, it must be genetics. All the while, the conservative Christians in our family started chattering, no, God gave you cancer so that he can display his glory in your life. You see, regardless of the perspective that the person carried, everyone was searching for a reason. The water supply, the genetics, a good God who must have some higher purpose for this terrible scourge that we just can't comprehend. You see, we desire control in our lives, and that desire for control leads us to believe that we're in control. So when we start to feel out of control, we have to blame something or someone, because we have to believe that if we're not in control, someone else must be. Something else must be. And again, there is some truth to that. God is ultimately in control. But that doesn't mean that God is to blame or that God causes everything that happens. Rather, it's to say just that. God is ultimately in control. The Sabbath isn't about let go and let God, as if the only thing that's standing between us and God doing some miraculous work in our life is that we need to give up our sense of control. We need to pray instead of do something. Nor is the Sabbath about let go and blame God, whether you see God's puppeteering of the world in a good or a bad light. No, the Sabbath resets our sense of control by giving us one day each week to simply let go. It's a day where we let go of the illusion that we have as much control as we think we do. It's a day where we let go and we remember that sometimes the world is just really messed up and shit happens. And it reminds us, the Sabbath reminds us that ultimately God is in control. I am the Lord. God is with us in our suffering. God is present in our lives. And God will one day heal and restore the world. God may not be micromanaging every event that takes place, but God is still ultimately in control of where the world is going and where it will end up. And I think that this is such an important reminder for our lives. Because as we've been talking about, all of us desire control. And that desire for control leads us to think that we are in control of things, even if we're not. That leads us to blame others, even blame God, as we desperately search for a reason for everything, even if there's none to be found other than the world simply isn't the way it's supposed to be yet. And when we do these things, when we clench our fists and we try to grab onto control, whether it's of our kids or others, when we blame others, when we blame God, in the end, we hurt people. We defame the name of God and we hurt ourselves. And you see, that's why, for ancient Israel, breaking the Sabbath carried with it the death penalty. Now, let's just be honest here. This is one of those spots in the Bible where most of us probably just simply disagree with it, right? Some of us, myself included, would say that no crime, no matter how heinous, deserves the death penalty. And all of us in this room would say that breaking the Sabbath for sure doesn't deserve the death penalty, especially since we've all been guilty of that at one point or another in our lives, right? This is just one of those places in the Bible that, quite frankly, is just challenging to try and make sense of. Now, I don't have all the answers, but I am open to having that conversation. So if this is a question, a place in the Bible that you're going, what's going on? You can always get in touch with me. You can buy me a beer and we can chat, all right? But tonight, I want us to just put that question to the side for a moment and see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is this. The main point, the reason that the death penalty is demanded for breaking the Sabbath in ancient Israel is because for them, the Sabbath was seen as extremely serious. And part of the reason that ancient Israel saw the Sabbath as being so serious, and part of the reason I think that we need to see the Sabbath seriously as well, is because of this relationship it has to our sense of control. You see, again, our desire for control leads us to believe we are in control, and that is harming us and harming others. We see this in all the ways that we try to control each other. We see it in all the blame games that we play in our relationships, even in our relationship with God. And that's why the Sabbath was taken so seriously by the people of ancient Israel. In fact, if we had any doubt that the Sabbath is actually connected to this important part of resetting our sense of control, all we have to do is look at the story that happens right after the one we were looking at this evening. This is Exodus chapter 32, verse 1. The people saw that Moses was taking a long time to come down from the mountain. So they gathered around Aaron and they said to him, "Come on, make us gods who can lead us. As for this man Moses who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't have a clue what has happened to him." And Aaron said to them, "All right, take out the gold rings from the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took out the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He collected them and tied them up in a cloth. And then he made a metal image of a bull calf. And the people declared, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." God instructs the people, take one day each week to stop your work so that you will remember, I am the Lord. One day each week, just remember that I am the Lord. Remember that you are not ultimately in control, I am. And then, of course, as is so often the case in our lives, a situation arises where the people feel out of control. Moses was taking too long to come down the mountain. In other words, they want Moses to come back now. But as soon as they realize that they can't actually control when Moses comes down the mountain, what they do is they blame him and they turn to a new leader, their priest, Aaron. They blame God. God is keeping Moses up on the mountain too long. God isn't saying anything or doing anything, so we should do something. And so they try to take control of the situation and they decide, you know what? Let's make a God. And why not? If you can make God, that's about the ultimate form of control that you can have in life. But when Moses actually does come down the mountain after a long time, these are the searing words that starts the next story. Moses saw that the people were out of control. Feeling out of control, the people of Israel react and they make an idol. They forget about the God who brought them out of slavery, the God who called them to be set apart and to heal the whole world. They react by creating for themselves a God that they can control, because the anxiety of being out of control was just simply too much to handle. And my friends, here's the terrifying part. So often in our lives, we do exactly the same thing. When we feel out of control, we react out of anxiety by clenching our fists and grabbing onto control. And when that doesn't work, we use those clenched fists to punch other people in the face with blame. We blame God. Worse, sometimes we even make a false God. We change our beliefs about God. We create beliefs about God that allow us to control God and control others more easily. And in the end, that only hurts us and it hurts everyone else. But you see, God has given us the Sabbath as a reset button for our lives. And part of its function is to reset our sense of control. It's a day where we are to let go. We let go of our desire to control everything. We let go of the illusion that we actually control much at all. We intentionally take time to be reminded that as much as you might want to do something about that situation that's driving you crazy, as much as you might want to do something about that person who is hurting you deeply, at least in this moment, there's nothing you can do. You simply have to admit your helplessness. You have to recognize that God is ultimately in control, not you, and you let go. And that is never fun, okay? Let's just be honest about that. Admitting helplessness, giving up control, letting go isn't fun. But it's necessary. And when we actually do this, it can be life-giving. I don't get to enjoy many luxuries in life, but one that I do try to keep up with in my own is getting a massage on a semi-regular basis. I have some back pain that I experience about every 8 to 12 weeks, so I try and get a massage in about that time. And every time that I go to get a massage, there's a moment that happens at the very beginning of the massage, right about 5 or 10 minutes in. The massage therapist is working on my back, kneading out knots and tightness, and all of a sudden he or she will kind of yell at me, to be honest. Adam, I need you to relax. Now, every time that this moment happens, I always find myself thinking, what are you talking about? The Zen music is playing. The aromatherapy's all up in my nose. My brain is clear. I am relaxed. But sure enough, in that moment, I'll take in a deep breath and I'll let it go. And all of a sudden, that place on my back where the massage therapist was working sinks in a bit more. This feeling of tension that I didn't even know was there releases from my body. My brain actually achieves clarity, and I relax. You see, I thought I was relaxed, but I wasn't actually relaxed until that moment. That's what the Sabbath is like. Every follower of Jesus I've ever met will say, I trust in God. But by taking a day to let go, a day to reset our sense of control, to be reminded that God is ultimately in control, not us, in that day we actually sink into that belief. When we observe the Sabbath, we take this intentional time to let go, to reset our sense of control. In that moment, we actually trust God. We actually relax, and we actually rest. We leave that desire for control behind. We leave our illusions of control behind. We put away the blaming and the anxiety and the fear that we so often resort to when we recognize that we're not in control. And in that moment, we just let go. It's this time where you say to yourself, I can't control this situation that's bugging me. No matter how hard I try, I can't make that person think better of me. And you just let go. If you're a follower of Jesus in that moment, maybe you can do this by praying, God, I can't control this situation. I can't control that person, and I am tired of blaming people. I'm tired of blaming myself. And so right now, in this moment, I let go. You are the Lord, and I trust in you. As I was preparing for this series a couple of months ago, I was reading this article by a Jewish man who was asked, how would you describe the Sabbath? And this Jewish man, his answer was very simple. He said, clench your fists for 1 minute and then let go. When you let go, that's the Sabbath. And that illustration has stuck with me because I've come to believe that we have to become people who learn to let go. We have to become people who carve out intentional time in our lives to reset our sense of control, because we are going to be happier and healthier emotionally and physically when we remember that we cannot make that person see things our way. When we remember that we can't make those people like us or trust us. When we remember that we can't make our past mistakes disappear. And when we take time to remember that God is ultimately in control, not us. For me, the people who get this concept the best are the people who actually do it. I know that comes as a surprise, right? But there are people in our world who actually, intentionally, each and every week, acknowledge a lack of control in their lives, and they let go of trying to hide it, get rid of it, or manage it without help. And in those Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, you will often hear this prayer, and it's the prayer that I want to close us with this evening. So would you pray with me? Prayer goes like this. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right. May I surrender to your will so that I may have joy in this life and supreme joy with you forever in the life to come. And God, that is our prayer tonight as well. And may it be so in our lives. I pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.